Hi, Stefan.
Hello.
So my name is Lelia, for the people who don't know me. I used to be a producer. I've done that for the last 12 years, and I've helped very small studios with very tiny budgets and very big studios. And I find that in my career, the hardest thing to take care of is actually the hosting. So I wanted to ask you, because you know very much about this, if you could help me with figuring out what kind of provider I can use. So maybe you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. Sure. Thank you. So I'm Stefan Ieler. I'm the CTO of Iceland. Been here with the company for 20 years. Since the very beginning, when it was just a single server assembled by us by buying different parts from different stores, going to the data center by public transport. And now suddenly I wake up and it's more than 10,000 servers worldwide, this global network, hosting many different games. Not just Ubisoft, as some people might have assumed, but all the big industry names and also voice providers and many others.
Nice, fantastic. Yep. That's the reason why I wanted to pick your brain, because you have the overview.
Yep.
So I guess the first question I always ask myself is, I don't know a lot about hosting. So what can I ask my hosting partner about? How can they help me with?
So to determine if your hosting partner is actually useful to you or not, from a games-related point of view, is depends on a number of factors. One, they should be giving you advice on your hardware choices.
Okay.
They should be asking you the questions regarding the life cycle of your game, how many players do you expect, about your game server software, how many of them do you plan to run on an instance, what's the optimization levels, so they can accurately determine the right hardware models and footprint for your game's development, beta and release.
Nice.
They should be giving you advice on your regions, like where do you expect your players to come from. They should be asking these questions to you.
Gotcha.
To better optimize where they should locate this infrastructure for you, and also determine if they need to make additional network connections or if there's any connectivity problems based on the region profile of your game. And they should be also talking about how to support you during this stage, during development, during the certifications, during the alpha beta test, and during release. Will there be a war room where they will be directly accessible to you in your studio? Will there be 24/7 coverage, or is it just tickets, telephone, or Slack, or what's the means of communication? Because during the time that your game has these gates, these very important stages during its development cycle, you need your hosting provider to be a partner.
Yeah,
and stick along with you. And also, they should be displaying some knowledge, thinking ahead with you to look at your game's optimization, help you there, show their past experiences of hosting other games, and how that can help you to make a better and more successful game release.
Thanks. Thanks. That really helps, because I think you've mentioned a bit like the different steps in the production. So I find that when I make my games, usually I'll go and think about the hosting provider quite at the end of the project. But we know that in production practices, you want to try and test as early as possible. Yeah. Can you help with this as well as a hosting provider?
Yes, and I think what you say is also correct, especially in the early days, so the first 10 years that we started as a company, that hosting question was the last thing on a game developer's mind. It definitely came at the end, because at the beginning, there was no hosting arranged by the game developers at all. It was just released into the wild and hope that the community starts hosting their own servers so people can play, but there was no afterthought or games as a service or live games model until, I guess, the earliest days of like a Battlefield 2, where they start taking some control of the ranking and experience of the players of the online game. So how can it be at an earlier point? Of course, as a game developer, you need to start thinking about it at an earlier stage, but your game or your hosting provider should think along, like giving you access to free proof of concepts, to trials, so you can, early in your development stage, you can already test with your development builds the different level of integrations that you would have to do, the different kind of products that you might be able to use, because from a hosting provider point of view, of course, you want to be able to offer different kind of products than just a server hosting to make it more attractive for a game developer to knock at your door earlier during the game life cycle. Think, for example, like anti-cheat or stuff like matchmaker integrations, allocation-based platforms. And the advantages by having this contact early, it also allows for a lot more flexibility.
Yeah.
So that you as a game company can have everything that you would like to provided by the hosting company, because there's still a lot of time towards the game's release.
Yeah.
Because if you knock on a hosting provider's door or cloud provider's door and your game is launching tomorrow, you're not going to get any flexibility or customization. You're going to get what's on their standard portfolio, and that's it. So if you have a game which has quite a bit of complexity, there's even more reason to think about hosting as soon as possible.
Yeah. Can you help as well during testing, like proper like QA moments, if I want to validate if the infrastructure works? How does that work?
Well, that's a good question, because if you test with just a single machine in a single region, you can test some aspects of your game, of course. But before you go towards your alpha stage or beta stage, or even your important play test that you might have with your publisher or your head office, you want to make sure that it also works at scale.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you need to test as well, and not forget, is actual node tests. Going at scale, going into multiple regions, going to see what happens when you can break your game, when you can break your backend.
Yeah.
And that you can only do by testing it at scale. And if you don't do that, it will happen during alpha or beta, but by that time, the public is already involved, because the moment you have an alpha test or beta test, it's always going to get out.
Yeah.
And if your whole backend and hosting strategy is not functioning at that point, you're already kind of too late.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why you should do it early. So yeah, the sizing of your environments, and especially the load tests that you run together, and you can only run that together, of course, when your hosting party is a partner to you, talking directly to your developers, and your developers have access to talk to their staffing and their developers to really get all the information and all the value out of those tests that you do.
Gotcha. Okay. And if I approach a hosting provider like this, so there's a lot of things that you can help me with, right? So how do I check billing? I'm a producer, right? So I'm gonna look at the budget of the game. I'm trying to find a partner that can help me make my game a success. What do I need to pay attention to when it comes to billing structure?
Well, you should start asking them some questions about their capacity availability, especially when you're going to start working with a cloud provider. As an example that you need to be careful of, you might have got off credits earlier during a convention. You think, I can run some time on this for my development environment. But you should realize that when you have a successful game at scale, a cloud provider works just like an infrastructure provider. You're talking about capacity problems, capacity management, that they run out of stock, that you have quotas, you need to suddenly prepay for your service. So be aware that whatever promises are made, you should fact check them and ask the tougher questions to them. Like, what will happen if I need 10,000 servers globally? What is the procedure? What kind of billing structure will it be? How are the payments options? What do we need to do? And what's the time frame that you can deliver it if it's out of stock?
Yeah.
You should really treat the hosting provider where you're going to work with, whether it's a physical one, a cloud one. You really should treat them the same.
Yeah.
Because you need to punch through the marketing. Because in the game hosting world, when we're talking about 10, 100,000 to sometimes even 10,000 of servers, it is in the end a capacity problem. And at the cloud provider, they're having the same problems that you have with the hosting provider, but it's usually covered by a tiny veil of marketing.
Yeah.
And the problem is that when you ignore this, then you're already stuck with them.
Yeah.
And then you're forced to pay at their terms.
Yeah.
And there's many examples in the games industry over the past 10 years where that has cost a lot of money, because at that point you can no longer switch.
Yeah.
When you're not in a position to negotiate when they know that you are their only option.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had that before, where we would choose a partner, and little by little we get more and more features. So we pay for more and more features, and you don't really see the costs pile up. And by that time, it's too late to change.
It's creeping up, and then when you get forced to make that call because your game is, for example, very successful, then you no longer have any option.
Yeah, it costs too much to change the provider.